And Debbie, you have co-hosting privileges, so you should be set on that. Okay, Ira?
Okay. Welcome, everybody. September is here, half over. I thought we were going to have Zoom and also meet in person, but COVID has reared its head again, and just the board didn't feel comfortable getting everybody co-mingling again. We didn't mind outside for the ice cream social, but I'm just apprehensive about getting a bunch of folks together inside. Tonight, we're very lucky to have Debbie Roos from Chatham County talking about floral diversity and plants that we can grow for our bees. Debbie has been agricultural agent for the Cooperative Extension of Chatham County since 1999. She's responsible for programming in the areas of commercial vegetable production, organic production, pollinator conservation, alternative agricultural enterprises, forestry, and beekeeping. Debbie actually worked for 3 years as agroforestry extension agent and technical trainer for the Peace Corps in Senegal, West Africa. She's also created which many of you have probably seen, the Pollinator Paradise demonstration garden in Pittsburgh 11 years ago, and has been teaching about pollinator gardening throughout the state and southern region ever since. She's received at least a couple of awards, most notably Governor's Conservation Achievement Award, and also Extension Agent of the Year in 2019 by the North Carolina State Beekeepers Association. So we are very lucky to have Debbie, and as she was talking earlier, every presentation she gives is never the same. So we're interested to hear this one though. Debbie, go ahead.
Thank you, Ira. I appreciate it. And also Jeff for inviting me, for all of y'all. And I'm lucky that you invited me. So excited to see everybody, if even by Zoom. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Get going on that. Okay. Oh, it always covers up my screen. There we go. Slideshow. Give me one sec. Can y'all can see all my slides, right? Anybody? Confirmation?
Yes, we can see them.
Okay, good. Cool. Let's see. Oh, well, I meant to put something in the chat, but I'll try to do that when we're done. I'll put my website in the chat. Okay. So yes, so I'm going to be talking to y'all about improving floral diversity for your bees. And full disclosure, I was a beekeeper for a short while, a few years, many years ago. Some of the beekeepers tease me and tell me I was more of a bee haver than a beekeeper. But I quickly learned that I was more interested in gardening for bees than beekeeping, because I'm just fascinated with insects of all types, including bees, but I also like gardening. All the photos in this presentation were taken in the pollinator garden that Ira mentioned. I hope some of y'all have been there. If not, I hope to entice you there. But it is a demonstration garden that I created in 2008. So I think we're going on 13, 14 years there. So we're going to focus tonight on how can we help our honeybees. And I've tried to, because I like taking pictures and have such a photo database over the years, I did try to, put as many honeybee pictures as I could in here. Typically my talks are more centered on native bees and other pollinators, but I also love our honeybees, of course. But in the simplest message here is to plant more flowers and don't contaminate them with pesticides. So we're going to be looking at how to do that. I don't need to tell a bunch of beekeepers about the decline in honeybee colonies over the years. You know, there's a number of reasons for that, pests and diseases, but also changes in how we farm across the country. You know, a more focus on monocultures and large acreage makes basically a food desert for our bees. Increased use of herbicide over the years means less weeds, and a lot of those weeds were providing valuable bee forage. Because farmers across the country are relying more on synthetic fertilizers, they're using fewer cover crops, and those were also valuable bee forage, and the increased use of pesticides. So there's been studies, some national studies looking at honeybee health, and a big part of their findings looked at the role nutrition plays in bee health, and found that, you know, the diet of a bee, their forage, really makes them, can make them, if it's not adequate or a high quality, can make them very susceptible to those diseases and parasites that we know all too well. So they basically need really good high quality forage and a variety of plants to support colony health. So there has been, you know, national efforts and funding over the past decade to try to increase the quality of pollinator habitat. So looking at netting pollen, as y'all probably are aware, not all pollens are created equal. You know, a lot of the plants that we consider weeds actually have really high protein content in their pollen, high quality pollen, things like dandelion or weedy, you know, blackberry brambles. Some of the cover crops are crops our farmers use, like canola, all have high quality pollens for bees. And also there's been some recent USDA research that was conducted in Iowa and Arizona that was looking at how nutritional needs of honeybees vary, you know, during the season, and how that can be met with pollens from the flowers from different seasons. And results did show that nutrients in the spring and the fall could be different. They're obviously foraging on different plants in the spring and the fall, and that typically aligned with the activities of the bees. So for example, they found that spring pollen that typically came predominantly from clovers in some of these sites had a higher concentration of essential fatty acid omega-3. And the higher levels of omega-3 were associated with honeybees having larger hypopharyngeal glands. And so we know that those glands produce royal jelly, which is fed to the queen and the larvae, and that allows more worker bees to be raised. And then in the fall, they did see differences, as you would expect, in flower species between Iowa and Arizona, which meant not only different flower species, but also different nutrients. But in Iowa, they found that fall pollen from asters and goldenrods, very similar to what we have here in North Carolina, had higher levels of certain amino acids and the lipids or fats. And these higher concentrations provided better support for the honeybee colonies over the winter. And in Arizona, since the honeybees, there wasn't such a harsh winter, they didn't require those same level of fat stores. So basically, I found this very interesting research. I definitely would like to see more to be able to identify, you know, which species of plants provided those important, you know, nutrients to bees. But you'll see that my message as we go through here is floral diversity. And I think if you aim for that, you're going to cover your bases. And speaking of that, so, you know, bees feeding on a single type of pollen, research has shown, are not as healthy as bees that feed on a variety of pollen. It's just like, you know, we're told as humans to eat a varied diet. That's much more healthy for us than eating, you know, burgers and fries every day, you know. So those polyfloral diets that come from mixed species help enhance immune functions. So that's what we're aiming for when we're planting bee forage. You know, a lot of times the beekeepers will ask me, just tell me what I can plant. I can plant 5 acres of it. My answer is, it's not, I mean, I can do that, but it's not one species. You know, you want to aim again for that diversity. So again, what I'm promoting here is providing a diversity of flowers. So we're going to look at how you can do that. What can you do to improve bee forage? Here's a honeybee that's foraging on the native yellow passion flower. Y'all are probably more familiar with the purple passion flower, but we also have a yellow one. So the first step to take is to assess your existing habitat, because you likely have already some high quality forage in your area that you might not recognize. And since you don't recognize it, it might not be protected. So you guys know as beekeepers that honeybees can forage up to 3 miles away. So it's important to look at what they're accessing in this radius. And so we're going to look at all of these. So natural areas and woodlands, here in North Carolina, we're blessed to have these wonderful native trees like redbud, red maple, tulip poplar that all provide very valuable forage for honeybees. And we all know that, the nectar that they get from the redbud helps build up those first stores of honey that can be used to build up the colony. You'll also find, again, those wild blackberry colonies, sourwood trees, and pussy willow that all provide very early sources of really high quality pollen. And then, of course, you've got wildflowers. These are all pictures I took right around my house. So we're seeing right now, the beggar ticks, the goldenrod is going to start blooming, in the aster and the perennial sunflowers and ageratum, all those things that are usually what we call ditch daisies or fallow fields or roadsides, all provide very important forage for our bees. And then the things that we intentionally plant, including both food crops, ornamental and cover crops. So things like, blueberry, strawberry, cucumber, but also cover crops like buckwheat, crimson clover are all very valuable forage, of course. And then it's not forget about our lawn weeds. I wish that I could, I'm hoping to, over time, convince more people of the importance of, hopefully in the simplest step, decreasing lawn, thinking of lawn as an area rug and not wall-to-wall carpet, because, lawns really are a very, very sterile environment. They're not necessarily good for the environment. I think some lawn is fine. There's a use for it, but we can do much better for our bees and other wildlife if we improve the diversity. So here in my house, my lawn, quote unquote, you wouldn't really call it that. I didn't plant it, by the way, it was already here. It's full of these, what we call weeds, everything from, purple dead nettle, henbit, clovers, dandelions, and violets. And those are all super valuable. I don't mow them when they're blooming because the bees are all over them. I realize that's not always acceptable. Like if that was in your front yard, your neighbors might not be too happy about that. I get that, but there are certainly areas, where you can let them be while they're flowering. Another step to do is just think about existing management practices that you use in your home landscape or apiary them to make them more bee friendly. So as I've mentioned already, not mowing your lawn weeds during bloom. If you are planting a vegetable garden or flower garden, trying to do a little bit of staggering of your planting dates to extend that bloom season. So I work with market farmers, that sell to farmers markets, and our farmers markets in Chatham are year round. So they want to have a harvest, most seasons. It's not just spring and summer, fall. So like, for example, the organic farmers that I work with, they're doing multiple plantings of basil or cucumber or squash or, even tomatoes and zinnias, flowers as well. You don't have to do it at the level that a market farmer would do it, but just planting, using more than one planting date can really lengthen that bloom season for your bees. And then even something we typically think of as bad when you allow crops to bolt, that's actually great for the bees. I have certainly in the past intentionally planted purple mustard, even in my pollinator garden, because, it is a beautiful ornamental crop as well. And I would plant it in the fall and want it to bolt or flower. and go through the winter. And that provided a really great forage for the bees, and it was also very attractive. And then, of course, with our 560 species of native bees, they're nesting, just trying to, protect those areas, those nesting sites. And then, of course, it doesn't do any good to, create or protect pollinator habitat if you're not going to be careful about your use of pesticides. So try not to use any pesticides at all if you can, but if you do, minimize the potential for poisoning by carefully selecting a product that's non-toxic to bees. Certainly not applying anything when things are blooming, minimizing drift, applying late in the evening when bees are not foraging, not using dust that can be picked up by bees and taken back to the hive, for example. But other than all of those things, so now we're going to talk about proactively, intentionally planting for pollinators and the various ways you can do that. So you can do seeded meadows, cover crops, hedgerows, and pollinator gardens. So first, we'll talk very briefly about direct seeded meadows. So this is, when you're going to be broadcasting seed over an area. A lot of people think this would be the easiest method to do or the cheapest method to do. I have to say, I have not seen a whole lot of success stories in this, especially if you look about 3 to 4 years later. And usually that's because people did not take adequate time to do site preparation, and their meadow becomes overrun with weeds. So if you really want to have a successful wildflower meadow, you probably need to spend a minimum of 1 year doing site prep to make sure you've gotten rid of your perennial weeds, whether that's through solarization or whatever technique you're going to use, and preparing that good seed bed. And then there's a really great publication that if y'all ask me at the end, I can try to link to it, or you can write it down here or take a picture with your phone or email me. Really great publication from the Xerces Society about establishing pollinator meadows. But they go through in detail, and typically, you can seed in the spring or the fall. When I direct seed native wildflowers, I typically do it in the fall, so they get that cold fortification going through the winter. But a lot of people do it in the spring. But it's not always a cheaper method either. Also, I've got on my website lots and lots of resources, including handouts. There's one called My Top 25 Native Pollinator Plants. It's a 2-page handout that you can download and print or just look at. And on the back, I've listed several really good seed suppliers. And I have vetted their seed mixes to make sure that what they call an appropriate seed mix for the Southeast or Mid-Atlantic is indeed appropriate for our area, meaning those are actually native species for North Carolina, and they are. So you can see an example here. They're typically going to include some grasses, but also, a lot of great perennial wildflowers. They're not always cheap. I mean, this one's only $66 per acre. Some of the seed mixes are several $100s a pound. So it's not always the cheapest way to do it. So you can also consider a combination of seeding and using plugs that you can get from a native wholesale nursery like Mellamarsh Farm in Chatham County. So let's move on to cover crops for bees. As I mentioned a few of them earlier, we generally have our cool season, which you would be planting right now, like starting mid-September is usually that 1 month window is a great time to plant things like crimson clover, for example, rye, and certain things you can plant later into the fall. But then you're seeding them now, and then they will germinate and overwinter and then really take off and bloom in the spring. One of the things I've done in my backyard for when I had my honeybees is I would mow my, lawn. I put in air quotes because it's not really a lawn, it's more weeds. Mow it really short in the fall, and then broadcast crimson clover cover crop seeds on top, and then broadcast a thin layer of compost on top of the seed, to get that seed to soil contact. And I would get a beautiful stand of crimson clover the next spring. So I wasn't tilling anything. I didn't have to get rid of my lawn to do that. So here's some great options for North Carolina. Things like canola, clover, hairy vetch, winter pea, and then warm season things would be buckwheat or if you look around my website, my Growing Small Farms, I've got much more information on cover crops. Hedgerows are becoming more popular in the US. They're basically a border of usually a mixture that's predominantly trees and shrubs, but can include forests and grasses. They're really big in Europe, to delineate field edges, as you can see in this picture. But they're becoming much more popular here. And they're a variety of widths, and they can have multiple uses, for cut flowers or food crops or wind, what do you call it? Prevent the wind. I think it's based on that name. And, some people manage them carefully and some people let them go wild. Some people will bush hog them every couple of years. So I also have a list of appropriate plants for North Carolina for hedgerows if you're interested. Okay, here's some right here. So again, you're still aiming for kind of different seasons. So again, the focus is on primarily, it looks like all of these I did trees and shrubs. So just an idea of some of the species, all native. And most of these I've got in my pollinator garden, by the way, but kind of getting a spring, summer, and fall bloom there. Now we're going to focus on the rest of the talk on establishing a perennial pollinator garden. This is the Chatham Mills Pollinator Garden. If we were live, I would ask for a show of hands of who's visited it, but I can't see you guys, so it won't do any good. Nobody can even raise their hand on Zoom. But again, this garden was created in 2008. I to be able to do tours and workshops and showcase pollinator habitat using predominantly native plants. I've got about 225 different species there, and 85% of them are native to North Carolina. So the aim for pollinator habitat or bee forage habitat is you want to have a minimum of 3 to 5 species blooming each season from spring to fall. And if the plant has a small profile, like it's not very wide diameter, you might want to group several of them together. And you do want to rely mostly on perennials because these are what the pollinators are going to be going to, and the more dependable food source. And as I've already mentioned, drilling into y'all, you want to have a diversity of flowers, as we've already talked about, that provides that diversity of pollen. And bees prefer flowers that are blue, yellow, purple, and white. They can't see red, but that doesn't mean they won't forage at a red flower, because it may have other guides that bring them or attract them to that flower. But just showing some of the diversity of flowers, I've found certainly most beekeepers I know care not only about honeybees, but also our native bees. And so having that diversity of flowers helps attract diverse pollinators that have different tongue lengths and different requirements. So, that means different color flowers, different shape and sizes of flowers. Flowers that are very open and shallow tend to attract smaller pollinators with short tongues, and then the more bigger blooms, things with longer tongues. You do want to avoid invasive plants if you're going to be including non-native plants, even if it's attractive to honeybees. Please don't put invasive plants in your yard. And I do hear, I've heard more than once from beekeepers that swear that this so-and-so plant is not invasive. It's not a problem on their property, but what they're not seeing is all the birds carry the seed off their property and deposit it in woodlands, and it's overrunning our woodlands. So there are some invasive plants that are highly attractive to honeybees, but please avoid those, and always check and make sure they're not on any invasive plant list. Honeybees are not native, as y'all know, but I still encourage you to include a lot of native plants when you're planting for your honeybees, because honeybees don't really care if the plant's native or not. But when you plant a native plant, it provides resources and supports a lot of native wildlife that exotic plants don't. So you're kind of a win-win. It's perfectly good for the honeybees, and also helping some of our native butterflies and native bees. So I think that's a really great thing to do. So for your bees, even though honeybees are a perennial colony, and we know that in the winter, if it's warm enough, above 60 degrees or whatever, they might be out foraging. You don't really need to worry about providing things that bloom in the middle of winter. If you can aim for early spring to late fall, you're doing great. Just a few of the plants that you'll see each season. This is all from the pollinator garden. Lots and lots of diversity, some spring, lots of choices in summer and then into the fall even. People are always amazed at how many things we have blooming in the fall. Think about the dearth period of blooms in your area. So when do we not have a lot of different species blooming? And typically for us, that's the middle of summer in North Carolina. But just to show you that the middle of summer doesn't have to be a dearth period of bloom, on my garden website, I have a what's in bloom list. So every 2 weeks I go around and document what's blooming with photos, and it's archived back to 2010. So you got, 11 years of data there. And you can see that in the middle of summer, late July, I've got more than 65 different species blooming. So you don't need that many, but that is no dearth of bloom. And even right now in mid-September, we've got 55 different species blooming. All the way into, early November. So getting into late fall, we've got over 40 species. So the point is, there are many options of things that you can plant to provide blooms during the summer. Another thing I like to do is when you find a plant that's highly attractive to bees or honeybees in particular, plant multiple species of it. Now, not all plants are created equal as far as their attractiveness to bees. So, so once you identify what those are, and I'll give you some ideas for that, then plant multiple species. Some examples would be milkweeds. In the pollinator garden, I've got 10 species of native milkweed. Each one is different. Some like, for example, swamp milkweed likes a moisture soil if you have it. Let's see, red ring milkweed and poke milkweed like it part shade. Butterfly weed likes it full sun, very, very hot and dry. So each one is a little bit different. They have different size flowers. They have different colors, different bloom periods. And the same with the asters. I've got about 12 species of native aster in the garden. Again, each one with its own niche, different color, different size, different shape. Some like full sun, some like part shade. And they have very different growth habits as well. Similar with the goldenrods, I've got about 12 species of goldenrod. So that means my goldenrod starts blooming in July and goes through October at least. Again, you don't need to have 12 species, but if you have more than one, it just lengthens your bloom season. And by the way, you can download a list of all the species in the pollinator garden on the website. There's a PDF on there. When you, if you have the space, it's nice to plant large patches of the same species. We know that bees practice flower constancy, also called floral fidelity. So they tend to stick to the same species of plant or flower when they're out foraging, and you're basically helping them out by grouping them all together. But some plants have a one single plant would be 4 feet wide. So obviously you wouldn't need to group too many of those together because it's already a big diameter and a big space for them to forage on. Just a little bit of information about garden installation. If you're looking at either creating a pollinator habitat or augmenting what you already have, definitely fall is the best time for planting. Now I know fall officially arrives next week, but I will not be planting next week because it's still going to be really warm and dry. So I'm going to wait, until it cools down a little more, and hopefully we start getting a little bit of rain. I was telling Jeff and a couple of the guys earlier before we started how dry we are. We only got 1.5 inches of rain in July and August. So y'all have probably gotten a lot more rain than that, I think. I'm not positive, but I know some of the counties have. But I'd like to see a little more rain before I start planting. I depending on what you're doing, sometimes I put down compost before I plant, depending on the site. I don't even always till. It just depends on what needs to be done. Obviously, if you're going into an area that had turf grass, you would need to till it. Once you got rid of the grass, that would be a good time to incorporate some compost. I do use hardwood mulch. I apply that once a year, triple shredded hardwood mulch, applied in the spring. And the important thing is, once you plant, you want to make sure that they get that garden bed or plants get a deep watering once a week for the first year. And I really think this is where a lot of gardeners drop the ball, and then they wonder why their perennials don't come back the next year. So if I'm planting in the fall, that's another good reason to plant in the fall, by the way, because usually we get sufficient irrigation and the plants are dormant in the winter. And so the roots are getting established. The plant doesn't have to worry about top growth. And then when spring comes around, they've got a great head start because their roots have reached down. And then I make sure they get that deep watering once a week, whether it comes through rain or from me, the waterer. And you want a deep watering. You don't want to go out there and water every 2 days, because then you're going to only encourage the roots to stay up close to the top, and they won't reach down. You want them to reach down deep into the soils to get water so that they're drought tolerant. So I do make that investment. I'm out there hand watering everything that's new for that first year if I have to. And then once I do that, I don't really have to water them again, because these are, very drought tolerant plants for the most part. So again, the garden, the pollinator garden, the demo garden is funded by private grant funds. As I mentioned, 225 unique species. We do manage it organically. I use no pesticides at all, except for an occasional organic fire ant treatment. We do have pests, but I also have lots and lots of beneficial predators and parasitoids that help keep those in check. I'll occasionally do some hand picking of certain things. And I also have a small group of volunteers that helps me. Also, the other thing to mention, we don't use any fertilizer at all. These kind of gardens don't need, any kind of fertilizer. It really surprises a lot of people. And so I think I've applied compost a couple of times over the 13 years of the garden, just a little bit of compost. So I'm just going to show you some pictures real quick, a little quick garden through the years. A lot of these pictures are on my website and social media. If any of y'all use social media, Instagram and Facebook, I have photo albums devoted to the garden, and I post there constantly about the pollinator garden. So it's a great way to learn, because I've got the first photo album I put up of the garden has about literally 1,000 pictures in it. Everything's identified. All the plants are identified and the insects. And then once I got to about almost 1,000, I do a separate photo album for each year. So again, very educational, because I'm identifying everything in them. So if it's a 95-degree day, or, in the middle of winter and you want to learn about some gardening, you can look at those. Here's a monarch laying her eggs on butterfly weed. American lady butterfly. My little buddy. My little anole. I love all the critters that the garden attracts, even when they eat my pollinators. As long as they belong there, I'm happy with them eating. I don't really care. I don't like the Chinese praying mantids coming in and eating all of my pollinators. So I'll actually remove a lot of their egg cases in the winter, because they don't belong here. They're invasive. Spring shot. And the thing about this garden, for those of you who haven't seen it, some of the garden beds are surrounded by lawn. Most of them are in a parking lot. So it is a tough, tough site. And I'm proud that we can grow what we grow in a parking lot. Whatever you see there, it should be much easier for you to grow in your own backyard, because you're not surrounded by concrete and asphalt, I'm assuming. There's a gray hair streak on ironweed. I call this my velvet Elvis. It's a sunflower bee on ironweed. Look at that beautiful pollen on the legs. This is one of those parking lot islands, completely surrounded by asphalt. This is purple prairie clover, honeybee, and bumblebee. That's a nodding onion, a native nodding onion. Blazing star. Common milkweed. One of my very favorite native vines. This is the spurred butterfly pea, Centrosema virginiana. It's a beautiful flower. It blooms for months. It's a very short vine. I basically planted as a ground cover, and you'll see honeybees, bumblebees, and carpenter bees mostly. It's also a host plant for some of the butterfly skippers. Joe Pye weed. I love the native grasses. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of my favorite plants that attract bees. This is not exactly my top 25 because I'm kind of focused more on honeybees here. But let's look at some of the spring bloomers. I've already mentioned pussy willows, are really nice early pollen for bees. We've talked about redbud, as y'all know, is very important for honeybees. And red maple, don't have to tell beekeepers how important that is. Blue star is a nice perennial that blooms in the spring. Amsonia. Here's what it looks like. It's a good 3 seasons of interest. The native sundrops, Anithera, the bees really like it. And here it is with some wild indigo. Here's a Midwestern cousin of the sundrops. It's called cutleaf evening primrose. The honeybees do love it. Spiderwort is a native, and honeybees and bumblebees like it a lot. It usually blooms in the spring and then again in the fall. It basically goes dormant in the summer. It can be pretty weedy, but I haven't considered it a problem. The penstemons, the beard tongue are nice. I've got several species of that in the garden. There's a honeybee going up in the flower there. Now, I have to confess, the wild indigo does not attract honeybees, but I snuck it in there because it's one of my very favorite plants, and it's super important for bumblebees and leafcutter bees, but you will never see a honeybee on it. But it's a gorgeous plant. You'll definitely want to have it in your garden, but you won't see honeybees on it. Coneflowers, you'll see all kinds of pollinators on all the different coneflowers. And even though I have them as a spring bloomer, they will bloom all the way almost to fall. I love the blanket flower. Again, I have it as a spring bloomer, but it blooms spring to fall if you keep it deadheaded. Very, very drought tolerant. Stokes aster will do a little bit of rebloom in the fall, even though it's predominantly a spring and it's evergreen. This is the Viburnum nudum possum haw, and you can see how that honeybee is just completely coated in pollen. Golden Alexander is a great plant, and it's also the native host for the black swallowtail caterpillar, which is what usually you see on your fennel and your dill and your parsley, but this is the native host plant for it. Bee balms, the monardas are attractive for a lot of different bees and butterflies. This is a great deciduous shrub, New Jersey tea, that blooms in the late spring, Ceanothus americana. Now, some of the summer bloomers, passion flower, a lot of people dismiss this as a weed. It's one of my favorites. It's medicinal, edible, and a great pollinator plant, primarily for honeybees and carpenter bees and some bumblebees. Oregano, so this is a non-native ornamental oregano, not the culinary, although it will bloom too, but typically it's not used for its blooms, of course. But this is a great blooming plant. And this particular Anise hyssop, Blue Fortune, is just a real pollinator magnet. You'll see all kinds of pollinators on it. It's a nice long bloom period. I have several species of blazing star or liatris in the garden, and it's a great one. Beautiful plant. And again, mountain mints. I think I've got 8 species of native mountain mint. So this is not like, people, oh, I'm never planting mint in my garden. It spreads like wildfire. This is not the same. This is the native. Now it will slowly spread, but I find it very, very manageable. This is Verbena hastata or blue vervain. It attracts honeybees and a lot of small native bee species. Of course, the milkweeds, the butterfly weed here, Asclepias tuberosa, likes it really hot and dry. This is a native red milkweed, Asclepias rubra, which of course, all the milkweeds, of course, are the host plant for the monarch. And if you want to help monarch caterpillars, you need to have milkweeds because that's the only thing the caterpillars will eat. A native purple milkweed, Asclepias purpurescens. And then this is a great underutilized plant, Veronicastrum virginicum, Culver's root. It's really nice, especially if you have some moist areas in your garden. I don't, but so it's pretty adaptable to also dry areas. But it's got this beautiful candelabra-like bloom. You can see how beautiful that bloom is, and all kinds of bees love it and butterflies as well. And that's it mixed with some coneflowers and bee balm and liatris. And then rattlesnake master is a great one. All kinds of pollinators attracted to it, including this carpenter bee. St. John's wort is one of my favorite shrubs for summer bloomers. And here again, honeybees love it as well as bumblebees. Buttonbush is one of my very favorite shrubs. It blooms from June to October. And it's just, and it's known as a wetland plant. But again, this bush right here is in a parking lot island. I promise you, it is not wet and by any stretch of the imagination. Very, very adaptable. Attracts so many different pollinators, and the birds love the seed. I took this picture about a week ago. I mean, look at that. You've got a monarch, a swallowtail, and a bumblebee. A couple of bumblebees. Joe Pye, I'm a big fan of the Joe Pye weeds. Just be careful. Some of the species can be 10 feet high. So just carefully select your species. Here's a monarch on Joe Pye weed. Some of the fall blooming, the perennial native swamp sunflowers. And of course, all the asters that we've already talked a little bit about. Lots and lots of different goldenrod species. I've got them all listed on my website. Here's a nice white goldenrod, Solidago bicolor. And the non-native sedums, the honeybees love those. Also, the deer love those, I've learned. I have to be careful where I put those. This is a great plant, underutilized. Golden aster, honeybees love it. It's very, very cheerful. It will seed in a good bit, but again, I love it. So I don't really mind if you don't want it. If it seeds in too much, it's really easy to pull out and share with someone else. The ironweed, a few species of ironweed. This is the threadleaf ironweed. This is the taller New York ironweed. The spotted horse mint, Monarda punctata, is blooming now. You see that little honeybee tucked up in there, but attracts lots and lots of different pollinators. And climbing aster is a woody vine. It's a great plant. It's actually very versatile. This is it on a, you can't see it, but this is on a trellis. So it's kind of grown above the trellis. And that's it, even stretching even higher above the trellis. It's a late bloomer, so this will bloom into the winter, and your honeybees will be grateful for it, even in January, February, if we're not having one of those winters where it's 5 degrees, which we've had a few of those in the 22 years I've lived here. But generally we don't. It's not usually that cold, and so you can find blooms late on this. And I experimentally planted it as a shrub. I wanted more of it, and I didn't have any more trellis. And I thought, well, I'm just going to see how it does as a freestanding shrub. It's a woody vine, and it's worth a try. I love to experiment, and this is it as a shrub. It does great. You just got to prune it hard in the spring, and it's just amazing. So I'm glad I tried that, and I've done several more in the garden since then. There's a lot of great herbs for bees, both annual and perennial. So we're going to look at a few of those. I love the lavender. I plant the Grosso lavender. It has a really long bloom. It's getting ready to bloom again, and it'll be full of honeybees and bumblebees. This is when I'm doing a garden tour, I always say, are there any beekeepers here? And I'll point to the calumet because it blooms from spring to fall, and you really want to have it if you're a beekeeper. It's only about 1 foot high, tiny little blooms, blooms for 3 seasons, and it's just 0 maintenance. So no brainer. So you definitely want to have that. I always make room for an annual ornamental basil. So I have to plant this every spring. It's an annual, but the bees also love that. Usually I do the African blue basil or the, what's the other one? The variegated, but they love it. And it gets about 3 feet high, 3 feet wide, quite large. Thyme is a great honeybee plant, very tiny flowers. It usually kind of poops out in the summer because it doesn't like the humidity of our summers. It does better in the spring, when it likes it when it's dry. So I've got a lot of information on my website. As I mentioned, I'll put, once I close out the PowerPoint, I'll put the link in there. So last year with COVID, when I couldn't do the in-person tours, I started doing virtual garden tours. So I love not only taking pictures, but video. So I do these monthly videos. I haven't posted one for the summer yet because now I'm doing both videos and in-person tours. That's a lot. But there's a lot. They're fun to look at. They're usually about 10 to 12, 15 minutes long max, and highlighting the plants and pollinators for that month. I've got lots of plant lists on there. I have been doing garden tours this summer. Unfortunately, they fill up really fast. I've probably done already 30 of them this year. So all the fall tours are full. However, if the Alamance County beekeepers want a private tour, we could arrange that. I can't have more than 25 people because that's too many people for a tour. But if y'all want to come for a private tour, either this fall or next year, happy to do that. So I've already mentioned the virtual garden tours. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. That is the end of that. Let me try to put, and I'll be happy to answer questions. So I'm just now pasted the link to my pollinator garden website on there. I know that was kind of fast. I hope everybody's still awake. But if y'all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them or try to answer them,
I will say, just to piggyback what you're talking about with lawns, is I got tired of mowing a large area and I tilled it up and started with just the crimson clover, then moved in with buckwheat. Eventually it was zinnias and cosmos, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and I don't have to mow it, and it saved me a ton of time and looks so much better.
Nice. Good job, Sarah. Yeah, I'm also on the steering committee for Chatham Conservation Partnership. And our October webinar is going to be on lawn alternatives. So if any of y'all are interested, it's open to anybody. Maybe email me and I'll make sure you get information about it. We haven't opened registration yet, but we're trying to promote, not doing away with lawns, but minimizing lawns, because you can do much more beneficial things for both the environment and wildlife if you minimize your lawn area.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because I plan on expanding it even more, because the less mowing I have to do, the happier I am.
Yeah. And I'll also be doing myself a webinar on planting for wildlife with native plants. So I haven't advertised that yet either. It'll probably be in early November. So y'all might want to just get on my email list. I'll tell you what, I'm going to type in here my email address. And if you want to get on my email list to get notice about such programs, then you need to email me. That'd be the easiest way to do it, I think. Any questions? How many of y'all, maybe, how would you say this? Let me know if you have what you consider a pollinator garden already. Maybe just type something in the chat. Let me see. Unless you have to go. I know y'all have other things you have to do. Because I can't really see you because none of you have your camera on. So I couldn't do a show of hands thing. Yeah, I mean, most people have some kind of garden at home, and it's just maybe a matter of how can I enhance it or, add to it to make it provide more resources for my bees. Small one. And again, vegetable gardens, are also helpful to bees, obviously, because, a lot of the plants need pollination by bees and other things. Any other questions?
I'd just like to chime in and say, I think the pollinator garden is a great place to go to get ideas for what plants look like, how big they are, what their habits are, so you better understand how to work them into your landscape. It's one thing to look at pictures in a book, but to go to the pollinator garden and actually see a mature plant various times of the year is really helpful.
Yeah. Thanks. And like I said, I'm happy to do a tour for y'all. I just asked for a minimum of 10 people. But just so we're clear, the garden is open 24/7 to the public. So you can go at any time. However, the plants are not labeled. So its educational value is maybe not as high unless you go on a tour. But that's one of the reasons I do my what's in bloom list, because, on the website, it helps you identify what's blooming. There's a lot of reasons I don't have the plants labeled, but, they're not. They're just not. It's too much to manage, too little time, not enough Debbie. I also just don't want to see a whole sea of signs everywhere I turn, but that's part of it as well. And also people move things. You'd be really surprised at what people do in a public space like that. I think it's okay to do. Usually they're pulling out so I don't have signs, but some of the plants are labeled, and they'll pull out the label and they'll lay it on the ground. That's really one of my pet peeves. I'm like, why can't you put it back where you found it? Like stick it in the ground, not lay it on top of the ground where there's this big white plastic thing there. Ugh. People. Well, I know y'all have a business meeting. I'm happy to stay if you have questions, but if you don't have any questions, I can sign off.
Thank you, Debbie. We'll let you know on the tour. See if we have enough people that, are interested and can come down there.
Cool. And just email me if y'all want to get on my list, my email list, just email me and I'll be glad to add you. But thanks for inviting me to talk. It's good to
Thank
see
you.
everybody, sort of see you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
All right. Have a good
evening.
meeting.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. It's a lot of ideas. Everybody, I know you may have, or hopefully received the newsletter, but if you did not, you need to add a newsletter at alamancebeekeeper.org to your contact list or your safe list. If you,
There we go.
hey, Caitlin.
Hey, I got a couple of people that bounced back and Reed has adjusted some settings for me. So I will resend to those that I know did not get it. But yes, if anybody else didn't get it, add the newsletter email address to your contacts, check your spam folder or email me. But I will be resending to those that I know didn't get it the next day or so.
Okay, I went on just to make sure that I had that in my contact list. All right. One thing that I did see a note come in on my email that for those of you that have not signed up for it, and you may not be an Amazon person, but if you sign up, if you order enough stuff from Amazon and sign up on the Amazon Smile and list the Alamance County Beekeepers as a recipient, since we are a 501c3 organization, it's a little bit of money coming in. Depends if you're a heavy user of Amazon. But for those of you that order a lot of stuff on Amazon, it's good for Alamance County beekeepers. Take a look at Amazon Smile and see if possibly you can help us out. The state fair. It's going to be individual entries this year from our club, and if you have an entry, I know I can take some stuff down. Caitlin's offered to take some things down. If Caitlin and I guess we just have to coordinate that. If you were gonna, I think the 15th was the last day of September to register. So if you've registered and are gonna have your things ready, like your honey or a quilt, or I know Karen's got a painting or a rock or something that she's gonna submit. Really anything, there's a lot of different things that you can enter if you're a beekeeper. Wax, lip balm, just a number of things. Just get a hold of myself or Caitlin and let us know if we need to hang out at the Ag Center parking lot to pick up your things, so we can do that. All right, I guess a lot of people are ringing my phone off the hook to sign up to be candidates for officers for Alamance County beekeepers. We'd like to get names by October 1st so that we can create a ballot. There's several openings this coming year, 2022, and they include your officers, the president, recording secretary, a 3-year director, and a program chair. So those are the slots that are available. And I guess it would be helpful if I sent you, I guess what we have listed as responsibilities of those areas. That will be something that I can get to you in shortly. But we also, we also need to elect a vice president. Sorry, Sarah, your suck is treasurer. No, just kidding. The whole ballot will be open, but the first year and second year directors will be the ones that we have now. It's just the third year director is going to change. Any questions? You got to take the mute button off to ask a question. All right. We won't talk about elections. Anything else? We had fully intended to participate in the farm to table, which is going to occur September 21st and 22nd. They have elected again this year to do it virtually. So I'm assuming that they will use recordings that Mike and I did last year for the fourth graders. Farm to tables, over those 2 days, they load every fourth grader and it goes to Alamance County Schools onto a bus, and they make a trip to Cedar Rock Park, and there's like 10 different stations. Beekeeping was just one of those. You have 8 or 9 minutes to tell them everything you know about beekeeping and hopefully impress upon them the need and worth of the honeybee. And then they ring a bell and the kids go to the next station. So it's 4 hours of interesting activities, but hopefully next year we'll be able to participate in person again. Haven't had any other usually this time of year, there's other festivals and things, but I have not had anybody contact us about doing those. I think everybody's kind of just sitting still and not getting out, which I can't blame them. It's to some degree. I've had my shots, but I still don't want to be sticking my head in where 400 people are. Next month, we have Don Hopkins, and November we'll have 3 people that I will select to give us about a 10-minute talk or so and questions on their experiences as a beekeeper this year. Of course, it always includes a first year, a second year, and maybe a more seasoned beekeeper. But those are a lot of people like that meeting. Interesting. I learn what not to do. Of course, I learn that every time I go out in my bee yard. So I know we had some sightings of goldenrod and asters about to bloom. I haven't seen any in bloom on my property yet, but I think Mike said he saw some blooms this morning, and Jeff saw some up and down Front Street. It's ready to bloom. Anyone else? I would hopefully we can get a trip maybe in the spring to go down to Chatham County. Sarah, you're almost in Chatham now, aren't you?
Essentially, yes. That's probably about right. Sarah, actually, the other Sarah on here might be closer than me.
Um,
I'm about 20 feet away.
Yeah.
Just if you go around the corner and up the hill, you're in Chatham County.
Well, that's kind of like me and other counties. It's not far away, except we're on the north end. We'll have Don Hopkins, I guess I said that, talk about the life of a bee inspector, which I can imagine that changes every day, depending on who calls them. But anybody have anything else?
Any cautionary tales about treating for Varroa right now? Is it too late?
No. No. I think I would treat, if you haven't treated, I would definitely, check to see what your mite level is and then treat. You can, I think with the temperatures that we're about to have, I think a lot of the treatments are still available. Formic Pro, Apigard, Apivar. Those are 3 that are, I think, primarily used, the folks that I talk to. Yeah, you need to, I would not wait until December and treat with oxalic acid. thinking, because right now is when the bees are making their, the queen's laying her winter bees now. And you want that brood nest to be well fed and populated. So, you need to be checking their food stores, and if your hives are light, you need to be feeding them. And if it gets too much further into September, you probably need to feed a 2-to-1 ratio of sugar to water.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, I guess that's the other question is, when do you switch over to 2-to-1 from 1-to-1?
I would say the beginning of October. I mean, you could still feed 1-to-1 syrup, but it's just going to take them more effort to process it and store it than 2-to-1.
I think 1-to-1 encourages the queen to lay more, probably. It's more similar to nectar. And if you're low on bees, you need the queen to be laying as much as possible right now to make the winter bees. And they need to be healthy bees that's not infested with mites. Another thing I'll mention, I finally got a chance to go in some hives today, and I had a couple that are queenless, or appear to be queenless, and nearly broodless. One of them was a bad candidate to merge with another colony for one reason. It had laying workers, but the problem with it, the drones, I didn't do an alcohol wash, but the drones that were emerging had bad looking wings. I mean, they had the deformed wing bears. So what I did, instead of combining it today, I went ahead and treated that colony again. But I treated it, closed it up, and treated it with oxalic acid, which doesn't do any good for the brood, but it was nearly broodless anyway. So you want to, I don't think it's a good idea to merge unhealthy bees with a healthy colony. So hopefully I'll prevent that. And the frames that have capped drone brood on them, I'll probably shake the bees off and just put those frames in a freezer. And
So just curious, Mike, since you have laying workers with that one, what's your next step for that hive?
it's too late in the year to try to correct that colony, which any time of the year is bad to try to turn around laying workers. Some people will continue to add frames of brood and attempt to encourage them to raise a queen, but that is a long process. The best way is to put a newspaper on top of a good colony, and then you can if you have multiple boxes in that colony with laying workers, you can combine a box to the different colonies. And this one happens to have the medium colony, the medium box is just about all honey. So I can just add honey frames whatever colony is light, that I can pull out empty frames and put in honey frames. And I'm planning to take 5 frames and put on top of a single 5-frame nuke and put the other 5 on top of another 5-frame nuke. I'll probably do that tomorrow.
Well, that sounds better than the plan that I had before, so thank you.
You can stack it up. You can stack them all up on top of a strong colony, but then you have so many boxes to deal with.
Just
And-
more opportunity for hive beetles.
Yes. But, and if some of the frames are empty, like if you have 4 boxes, you can, if you have enough empty frames, you can pull those out and condense it down. If the frames happen to be the same size. So I like to, if I have 2 boxes, I like to give 1 box to one colony and another box to another colony. And then next spring, if that colony is strong enough, you can pull off a split and get it back down to your 2 boxes like you want to manage it. So that's my plan. Just try to, and then some colonies are beyond saving. You can just shake the bees off and let them go wherever they want to go and put your equipment up. One of the 2 that I went into is probably fits that category. But I wanted to treat the bees and kill any mites because those bees will go somewhere. And I just wanted to kill those mites before I did that, if possible. And you
Thank
gotta
you so
watch,
much.
you have to watch out for robin this time of year too. We're having a fall flow, somewhat, but they are opportunistic creatures, and that one box that I had open this morning, one colony, when we closed it up, there was bees all around it. I mean, just all over the place trying to go in. So while I was treating it, actually. So I covered it up with a sheet that covered the whole colony, and I went out there later this afternoon and took that off. And that seemed to work this time.
Yeah, I've treated, I guess, fall on my sword. The Apivar that I started using this year was what I had saved from last year, and I found out that it's not effective after you open that foil packet after about 2 weeks. So I had some mites, and I treated with like Jeff Leister and Jeff Thielander with half a dose of Apigard gel. And that had the bees, normally are outside, especially on a couple of warm days. They're really active, and I think it was Tuesday night, I was headed back to the house and saw a bunch of bees in the air, and they landed on one of my green giant trees. It was about a pound. I put them in a nuke. I haven't looked at them since. I've fed them, but I might end up combining them with another one. But it's not what you expected to see in mid-September.
Ira, were you using 50 grams or the 25-gram treatment?
25. they were, when it got warm, they were active.
Yeah, I was doing follow-up treatments. I did the Apivar route on all my hives, and 2 came out when I did the follow-up mite counts after the 8-week treatment. 2 of them were about like 2%. And I figured I'll just go ahead and treat them with Apigard since the temperatures were okay, but they were still in the 80s. So I decided to use the 25 grams, a half dose, which I've had really good luck in the past. This is the first summer I've used Apigard. Apivar, the strips.
Right.
And the Apigard, I've always used it. But so I did a follow-up just make sure I get that last few mites out of there if I could. It's not going to be totally empty of mites, but I'm knocked it down a little further. So hopefully when I take my next counts, I'll have either 1% or 0 or less.
Right. Do you use half a dose a week apart?
Yes, that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Okay.
Half a dose. And of course, I put it on a card. I weigh it out, put it on a 3x5 card with a spacer. And I did something I hadn't done before. I went ahead, I fed all my hives starting yesterday of 1-to-1. And I actually fed them while treating with the Apigard. And there are some comments in the literature about probably that's not the thing to do. Apigard says the bees concentrate on the food rather than concentrating on removing the Apigard from the hive, but I had no trouble. It didn't interrupt the feeding. They're still actively removing the card, and they're actively removing the Apigard. So the treating, they finished the hive. I loaded up the hives yesterday with feed 1-to-1, and at noon or thereafter, all those hives were empty. So I'll wait a couple of days, then I'll add another treatment with 1-to-1 serum.
Yeah, out of about 10 or 12 hives, I only had one that had a little bit of the Apigard still on the card. The rest of them, the cards were gone. They had taken the Apigard out and the card as well.
I'm just wrapping up the second week of treating with Apigard following Apivar, and I'm still seeing some of the gel. They removed the first dose within a day or two, and the second dose is not completely gone yet. Jeff, I'm wondering, are you planning on, are you contemplating the possibility of a third dose? Are you going to do mite counts to determine whether that's necessary? Or are you just going to wait until they're broodless and go then?
I'm going to go ahead and wait till they're broodless, if that happens this year, with the predictions being that it's going to be a warm fall. And it'll be interesting to monitor and see when they're broodless and when I can actually treat with oxalic acid sublimation. But that's to be determined. But I probably won't do a third. I think it was low enough to begin with. 2 to 3% this time of year, according to the literature, is okay. Now, I didn't use an alcohol wash, so I was using the sugar shake, which is not supposedly as accurate as the alcohol. That's why I decided, well, if it's 2% or over 3% with a sugar shake, maybe I've missed a couple mites. So I just took the policy that I'll just go ahead and treat with Apigard, since the temperatures were okay, and
Yeah.
I've used it in the past. I knew how to use it, and the temperature again were right. So that's why I decided to go ahead and do that.
So I guess the moral of the story is it's not too late to treat, and it's probably it's definitely better to go ahead and see what your mite load is and treat than wait. You know, if you had plans to use oxalic, you know, when they're broodless, I usually do that sometime around Christmas. It may, you know, may be earlier this year. Who knows? Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Check after you treat and check to see if what your if the product that you used was effective. Any other questions? Hopefully we'll have asters and goldenrods helping our food stores out rather than mixing up 2-to-1 syrup. Well, if no one has any questions, do ask if you're interested in one of our positions for the club. Please contact me or one of the other officers so we can get the ballot out sometime in October. Look forward to seeing you in October when we meet with Don Hopkins.
Thanks, Ira.
Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.
Okay.